Hi, my name is Bethany, and today I want to go over the executive function cognitive flexibility. Before we begin, of course, as usual with the executive function series I have going on this channel, I just want to make it very clear to you that having an issue with executive function does not necessarily mean that you are autistic. There are a lot of people who deal with issues in executive functioning. In fact, it is one of the major hallmarks of ADHD. However, again, doesn't necessarily mean you have ADHD either. One source suggests that most of the population has an issue with at least one executive function, so there you go. Cognitive flexibility is sometimes also called flexible thinking. It is one of the main three executive functions that make up the so-called command center of the brain, and it deals a lot with problem solving. The Handbook of Behavioral Neuroscience says, cognitive flexibility is a critical executive function that can be broadly defined as the ability to adapt behaviors in response to changes in the environment. Another definition puts it like this: cognitive flexibility refers to the ability to shift attention between task sets, attributes of a stimulus, responses, perspectives, or strategies. So basically, it appears that cognitive flexibility has to do with that concept of being flexible or rolling with the punches, being able to basically adapt to things in your environment or shift to another task or maybe even shift perspectives, things like that. Now, this executive function I think is particularly of interest for autistic people because it is pretty well known that autistic people do have a tendency to become very rigid in their thinking and want things to go in a particular way and by certain patterns and schedules and routines. Before we get into more sciencey kind of stuff, here are some everyday examples of someone possibly having issues with cognitive flexibility as outlined by understood.org. Kids with poor flexible thinking skills can often seem rigid. They may seem fearful of change or easily frustrated by challenges that come their way. That's because they tend to get stuck in one activity or in one way of perceiving things. They also have a hard time coming up with alternative solutions. Situation: it's time to stop playing and get ready for school. A child who struggles with cognitive flexibility may find it intolerable to switch from play mode to school mode. She may have a tantrum. Flexible thinking would help her realize she can pick up her game where she left off when she gets home from school. Situation: the swim instructor is teaching the proper way to do the crawl. A child might stick with her old method of doggy paddling and declare the new way impossible. Flexible thinking would help her see that the new method could work if she gave it a try. Situation: there's homework in almost every subject tonight. A child gets frustrated when she tries to switch from doing French homework to algebra. Flexible thinking would help her shift gears and consider the skills she needs for algebra. That would help her make the switch more easily. Situation: a game of tag at a birthday party has slightly different rules than usual. A child keeps playing by the rules she knows. She eventually quits and sits on the sidelines. Flexible thinking would help her think quickly, use what she knows, and adapt to the rule changes. Situation: a group of friends are talking about a new TV show at recess. A child who struggles with flexible thinking may have an opinion about the latest plot twist, but when the other kids have a different view of what happens, she keeps restating her point, annoying her friends. Flexible thinking would help her consider their perspective. I really appreciate these examples, especially because I feel like it's almost a decent snapshot of the things that I struggle with and deal with myself on a daily basis. The first time I read some of these scenarios, I literally started to tense these muscles here and draw my shoulder up. I don't know, I don't like it. It bothers me. I was feeling those feelings when reading some of these because of the demand to shift and change things, do things a different way that aren't necessary. Like, I was already feeling that secondhand aversion to trying to shift for them, even though these are just random scenarios they came up with. My husband is very helpful because he tends to help me out with seeing things in a different perspective or way of thinking or seeing it differently, because I tend to get really stuck on the way my thinking pattern is. And a lot of times the way I think through things is very efficient, and a lot of times it works and I can get there faster than a lot of other people. But when it doesn't, I can't get off that route, that mental map or route that I feel like it's taking, and it won't let me change it. And so having someone outside of myself help me, I'll still get frustrated, but it helps me to understand that this isn't the only way, because I'll get really stuck if it's not working and I keep trying to do it the same way over and over because it's supposed to work, and that would be an issue with cognitive flexibility. And this, of course, is why it's so well integrated with the concept of problem solving. And I really think this is why a lot of autistic people can come across as controlling. I actually did a video on that. I'll link it. I always forget what side it is, but I'll link it for you if you haven't seen that one and you want to check it out. Of course, with most things, executive functions are developed over time, and that of course means that someone came up with a way to test when people tend to develop better cognitive flexibility. One such test is called the DCCS, which is the Dimensional Change Card Sort. So basically, children are given a set of cards that has two features on them. They call this bivalent. One card might have a blue star on it, and another card might have a yellow circle on it, and yet another card might have a yellow star. So basically you're dealing with different shapes that are also different colors. So that would be the two features or the bivalent part of the card. So the idea of the test is to give them these cards and then have them sort them by one rule. So an example is sort them out into their colors. So all the yellow cards, all the blue cards, whatever. Then they're going to have them switch and have them sort by a different rule. So if they were sorting by color, now they're going to sort by shape. Under standard conditions, both 3 and 5-year-olds will have no problem sorting the cards by that first rule. But usually the 5-year-olds have no problem moving on to changing the rules and sorting by the other condition, whereas the 3-year-olds they're not okay. They're not okay with you changing the rules and having them sort now instead by shape. So the idea is that this shows that around 5 years old, we are developing a better cognitive flexibility. This also gives us a little bit of insight behind cognitive functioning and how that works. So for the child to be able to switch tasks or switch rules appropriately, they're going to have to see that there are two stimuli, the bivalent part, right? That there is a shape and then there is a color. And they're going to have to also basically resolve a conflict in their brain, because their brain was saying, look at the color, look at the color, look at the color. Now the rule is, no, we're gonna look at the shape. We're gonna focus more on the shape. So they have to be able to identify that we're dealing with color and shape, and then also be able to resolve this conflict in your brain between switching the rules, basically. There's one thing that they were looking into about a brain wave, I believe called the N2 wave, and if it had a bigger amplitude, these children tended to have more of a problem switching to the different rules, and if it had a smaller amplitude, then those were typically the children who were able to switch much more smoothly. So apparently the amplitude of that N2 wave, for some reason, has to do with part of the cognitive flexibility switching stuffs in your brain. Having children practice on this kind of thing can actually improve their results, and when they do this, it actually makes that wave amplitude smaller. A 2011 study found that a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate gyrus, or the ACG, tends to be overactive in people who have trouble with cognitive flexibility. It also appears to play a role in social cognition, and evidence points to disruption in the structure and the function of this ACG in people with ASD. So basically, there's lots of interesting things going on in your brain, with like brain waves and parts of your brain that do things and send signals and tell the different stimuli it's looking at apart, and understanding what to focus on, what to block out, what's important, what's not, and how to be able to shift between those kinds of focuses, basically. Now, I believe this is similar to a more grown-up version of that kind of test, where there are words typed out onto a paper and the words are blue, purple, green, orange, or whatever, but the color of the font is different than the word. So if the word says blue, it might be in orange. So the word BLUE might be typed out in the color orange, so that way your brain has to try to figure out what it's looking at and discern between saying, oh, that's orange, the color, or that's blue, the word. And basically the idea is you're supposed to be able to either read the words or tell the colors of the words. It's very challenging, okay? I randomly think about this test purely because someone had printed this out, laminated it, and taped it to the shield of one of the things that the food was in or whatever, self-serve cold food or whatever out of the cafeteria and stuff. Someone had taped it on there, I guess, for us to do while we were bored waiting in line. I don't know. And so I randomly think about that test a lot, but I believe that has something to do with cognitive flexibility and your brain trying to basically resolve that conflict of different stimuli and its meanings and all that jazz. So we know that autistic people tend to have poorer cognitive flexibility because we tend to get stuck on things, we tend to have rigid thinking, and we tend to have problems with changing things or shifting to different activities, etc. So how can we improve cognitive flexibility? One suggestion is to change your diet to have higher complex carbohydrate foods to protein ratio, or adding foods that help boost serotonin. It's thought that people who tend to be rigid in thinking or behavior have a deficit in serotonin. Personal side note, I do wonder if that is part of the reason why depression tends to be comorbid with autism. If there is a deficit in serotonin, obviously that affects more than just your flexibility of your thinking. Another suggestion is to exercise, which helps to increase something called L-tryptophan, which is a building block of serotonin. Obviously, exercise helps your overall health and mental health, so I mean, it's not a bad thing to do in general. Understood.org shares some ideas that are more aimed specifically at children. So something they suggest is the Fanny Dooley game, where Fanny Dooley only likes words that have double letters. So then you're supposed to come up with things that Fanny Dooley does and doesn't like. Fanny Dooley likes cheese because there's two E's next to each other in cheese, but she doesn't like bikes because there's not double letters in it or whatever, to help thinking with different rules and stuff like that. They also suggest trying to find different ways to do everyday things. So like if you make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, maybe you put the jelly on first when you normally put on the peanut butter first or something, just to make small changes, or take a different route if you go for a walk or a drive or whatever. Maybe play with things differently or decide you want to do something a little bit out of routine. Now, from my perspective, I just want to warn you to please be careful and gentle with this. Autistic people really have trouble with this to the point where it can be really distressing, and if your child's already having a rough day, I don't think it's a good idea to try to do this. If they're having a great day and it's something to try, awesome, but if you're going to be like, you must change this right now to get more flexible in your thinking, then I feel like that might do more harm than good. So just use your judgment, obviously be mindful, and don't get upset if that makes them melt down or makes them upset, because that's how their brain is working, and it has to work around the concept of you changing stuff on them. My personal favorite from this group of suggestions is self-talk, because it is something I personally still use. The idea is basically to teach your child to think out loud through the steps and what they're doing, and also look to see if, does this situation look like something I've encountered before, and stuff like that. I think that skill is very important because it seems that autistic people tend to be good at patterns. So if we see this situation looks like this situation, and then also being able to identify what's different from the situation to this situation and why the exact response may work here but not here, is super important for us to be able to modify to match this. Because if we don't understand why what worked here doesn't work here, it's just very frustrating and irritating. But if you can start to identify why things might be similar or why things might be different, that can really help. For me personally, I need to know why things are and how they work. And if I know the answer to that, I tend to be able to get to the right the right answer a lot easier. Not all the time, but usually. Anyway, I have resources, references, etc. linked in the description box as usual. So if you want to read more of the suggestions that are on these sites for helping, or more examples to see if possibly you or someone you know has issues with cognitive flexibility and such not, obviously feel free to check all of that out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that it was useful and that you enjoyed it and enjoyed my time going off into random unnecessary information. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like and let me know all of your thoughts in the comments below. I upload to this channel every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, so if you're interested in hearing autism-related topics by me, you should go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Thank you to everyone who supports me through YouTube as channel members and my patrons through Patreon. And a special thank you to my Spaz tier patron, Jesse Graves. Thank you all so much. I hope you're having a wonderful week, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!